increasing wealth among the feudal lords that broke their contract with the peasantry that existed during the feudal years, and so forth. So the nature of that kind of image in the mind as something that I apply in my daily experience to improve the details of my life, to be kinder to my neighbor, to treat my animals with greater fairness, to wash my hands, to not constantly be bathed in the filth that surrounds me, etc., etc., was the image of something better, which is, after all, the driving energy behind all arts and sciences and behind all social attempts of social improvement, is you learn from your mistakes. You wish something were different, and you have ideas of how to implement the improvement. What I'd like to come today is something quite different. For somewhere in the 16th, 17th century, in the Western world, as I heard last night in a wonderful presentation of a book by Leon Ferguson over at the Y. He spoke about 6 applications that came out of the Western world and produced what we call the West. He started a little earlier, 600 years ago, but anywhere, somewhere in the 17th century, a new momentum entered the mentality of people. No longer did they dream of a better world, like Bruegel's Slovakia of fried chickens flying through the air. They actually set a better world in motion. And what happened, when you can see it in different elements, he mentioned competition and trade, he mentioned the rule of law and other things like this. I'd like to add to that the Civil War in England, which limited again the power of the king and gave the people a feeling of their power to transform their situation. That occurred at the same time at which the rise of what we call modern science took place. That is the systematic study of how things function, and then making use of that study to improve the situation in which we live. So the utopian vision coming out of the 16th, 17th century was no longer just wishful thinking, Slovakia, or wouldn't it be nice if we had a good king? In the Civil War in England, they actually got rid of a king, killed him, replaced him, and it gave him a sensation of actually implementing what was a vision, a dream. And science helped you in other areas to improve life situation, to increase the harvest, to eventually, a century later, improve the hygiene of people, to enable them to have more surviving children in the family, an expanding population. And then, of course, the technical application of the scientific insight in the rise of industrialization, the replacement of machinery, of people by machinery, and so forth. All gave the impression, or created a situation, more than an impression, of a utopia of new beginnings. We're not stuck in merely repetition with dreams of a better world, but we can actually accomplish something. That's also the time when so many people started to immigrate to this continent in the belief not only that they needed to be free to practice their religion, but also coming over here, they needed to be free to invent a new mankind. That this would be the promised land. This would be Jerusalem, the city on a hill. That this is a new world in which the old things could be replaced by traveling across the ocean and coming into a continent to all appearances was virtually empty. It was a new world, totally new. Daniel Burstein describes the wonderful delight in discovering that the flora and fauna on this continent was very different from what they had left behind in Europe. They set out to give names to things, just like Adam and Eve gave names to things that they first encountered. They wrestled with elements in what is commonly accepted to be a rather harsh continent in terms of climate. You have extreme colds and extreme heat, extreme dryness and extreme humidity that Europeans had never experienced in that measure. And so this is a wild continent, and yet they conquered. They set out to create a new world in a new setting, a new Jerusalem, and it was easy to come to conclude that once there, and following the call from Scripture to practice the religion of Christianity, that they would also become a new man, a new kind of person. I think this is the root of what still today people believe is American exceptionalism, that somehow this is an exceptional people rather than unique people in exceptional moments doing exceptional things. That somehow this is a different kind of person that developed from merely the migration over here. When I talk to Europeans and they complain about Americans' readiness to use the gun, I always point out, you know, you shot the Indians and you practiced slavery and all these nasty things. I always point out that after all, the people who did that were all Europeans, first-generation immigrants. They brought their habits with them. It's just that here there was less shame. You could get away with things more easily because the country was so empty. You could always run away from the sheriff, or you can vote in a sheriff more to your liking, who wasn't necessarily maintaining the law. After all, the government didn't exist. First, people were here. The government was the people. There was no controlling head over it, no royalty or otherwise. And thus, it's intriguing to see that in the 17th century and the 18th, then, with your revolution, in contrast to the French Revolution, people came over here with this belief that this is a new beginning. This is the promised land. Much the way the Huguenots going to South Africa thought that they had scripture supporting their claim of that land